This is the OU postgame show as the Sooners, who had a closer than expected first half, was finally able to separate themselves from Baylor in the second half and route to a 33-7 victory. For Oklahoma, it's an important win because it's the conference opener. Of course, they've owned the Big 12 the last 3 years, so they open up Big 12 play this season at 1-0. 3-2 overall, while Baylor drops to 3-2 overall and obviously begins their conference play with a defeat. Up next for Oklahoma, they can finally think about the Cotton Bowl, Dallas, Texas, and their October 17th morning matchup against the Texas Longhorns. Texas will probably be a 7-point favorite at least to win that game. OU Texas, the Red River Rivalry, October 17th, 11 a.m. kickoff time, and it will be nationally broadcast on ABC. Before we get into the breakdown of Oklahoma-Baylor, the postgame, I would like to thank you-know-who for the tickets for the Oklahoma-Baylor game on Saturday. First time in a few years that I had been to an OU game, and it really reminded me of what I've missed after all these years, just absolutely getting an adrenaline rush because of the Sooner environment, the history, the tradition that basically you're embracing, and also just the camaraderie of college football. Truly a wonderful sport, and again, it reminded me of all that I've missed since 2002, which was the last time I had been to a Sooner game. So as you can tell, it's been a while. Took my son, and it was his first ever OU game. He's only 4, and word of advice, if you are a mother or a father, you've never taken your 3, 4, 5-year-old to an OU game, you may want to be aware of something. Don't be surprised if at some point in the game, maybe even early on, if they want to go home, because at that age, all they think about for the most part are chocolate chip cookies, ice cream, Thomas the Train, and cartoons. Yeah, 3.5 hours of watching a football game to a 4-year-old doesn't exactly make their mouth water. So that's what happened today. But at least my son stuck it out and watched the game. Or at least pretended like he was watching the game. I think he was sleeping at times. But just a word of warning to you, if you plan on taking your little one, boy or girl, to a college football game, you might find yourself in a bit of a struggle getting them to devote their attention to the game. Now, speaking of the game, did Oklahoma look impressive on the scoreboard as far as winning the game? 33-7. Not so sure about that. Did they separate themselves from Baylor in the second half after a first half in which it was close? Yeah, I guess. Look, even though the OU defense, I thought, really stood out in the game, they were the stars. They were spectacular. The defensive line, I thought, played very well. I thought the secondary had a nice comeback game after the subpar game that they showed against Miami in that loss just the game before. Even though I thought the defense played very well, they basically shut Baylor's running game down. In fact, Baylor didn't even have a running game, and the passing game was pretty much contained by the Sooner D. I was pretty frustrated with the Oklahoma wide receivers. Okay, I don't have a football right at this time, but I'm going to use a prop, okay? Oh, see there? That's a drop. But hey, it's only one. It's not at least 6 drop passes, which the Oklahoma wide receivers had in the first half. Oklahoma could not catch the football when they needed to the most. Drop here, drop there. Receivers dropping the ball, dropping it in the end zone for a touchdown. Heck, the fullback could even hold on to a touchdown pass. Oklahoma stunk as far as trying to catch the football. The ball was right there on the hands, at least 6 drop passes by the Sooners, and it was just frustrating with a capital F. Look, if the Oklahoma Sooners are going to beat the Texas Longhorns, they can't have that type of execution or lack of execution that they showed against Baylor. At least Oklahoma in the second half was able to pull it together, okay? So I give them credit for that. But there's no reason whatsoever this should be 14-7 at home against a team you've never lost to in your entire history. It was 14-7 against Baylor. Baylor. And for the reason, most part, because of drop passes, in particular in the red zone. And that's another area. The Sooners can't keep settling for field goals when they get inside the opponent's 20-yard line. Poor Jimmy Stevens, the OU kicker. I thought his foot was going to fall off of his leg as much as he was kicking. Granted, it's nice to have a field goal kicker because 3 points are better than nothing on a possession. But 3 isn't nor will ever be as good as 7, and there were several times in which Oklahoma should have had at least 7 points of possessions, but couldn't because they couldn't hold on to the ball and they could not run inside the red zone. For some reason, they just could not run. Probably because of a little thing called lack of blocking. Yeah, that would help. So, again, I thought Oklahoma's effort was there, but the execution simply was not. And again, that will not fly against Texas. The Longhorns will beat them and beat them badly if they have to end up settling for field goals. Because Texas is not the type of team that you're going to be able to shut down 7 points like you were against Baylor. Much different team, much tougher challenge. And again, Texas last year scored 45 on them. Texas could score a lot of points on Oklahoma, so Oklahoma might have to counter with a lot of points of their own. Of course, we'll talk more about OU Texas on the weekly matchup show coming up the week of October 17th, so check back on that. Sam Bradford, for the most part, thought he looked sharp as a razor. 380 yards of passing, did have a touchdown pass. Should have had more touchdown passes if it weren't for his receivers not holding on to the ball. There's only really 2 instances where I really think in the game where Bradford could have been better, and that was on that very first possession when OU was threatening on a 4th down call in Baylor territory, had Brody Eldridge wide open and threw it behind him. That was Bradford's fault. And there was another instance where on a 4th down later in the game, Oklahoma had 4th and long, and Bradford nearly threw an interception, but didn't. So overall, I thought Bradford looked terrific, looked like his old self, had 49 pass attempts, 27 completions, 22 incompletions, but again, some of those were either flat-out drops or passes that in some way, shape, or form did hit the Oklahoma receiver's hands and could have or could not have been caught. But still, Bradford, I thought, looked good, and that's definitely a good sign, at least throwing the ball for Oklahoma against Texas. Now, let's go ahead and briefly go over the 4 keys to the game that I reviewed during my weekly matchup show. Number 1, continue to control the turnovers. Big thumbs up for Oklahoma because they didn't have any turnovers in the game. Baylor did have 2 turnovers, but Oklahoma didn't have any. And when you're an underdog, it's difficult to win when the favorite doesn't turn the ball over. So good job, OU there. Make sure you have it covered. Got to have it covered. Thumbs up again for Oklahoma. In fact, I thought the secondary really had it covered against Baylor. Look, Oklahoma knew that Baylor was 70th in pass offense. They knew that Baylor only averaged just barely over 200 yards throwing per game. Baylor ended up with, I think, 220 yards throwing, so the Sooner defense did their homework, in particular the secondary. They did have it covered. They even had, I think, a tip pass for an interception deep in Baylor territory, so the secondary passed the test. And then, number 3, penalties. Thumbs down, way down for Oklahoma in this area. You got to control the penalties. Oklahoma did not do that. 110 yards in penalties off only 7 penalties. Excessive. Way too much. You have over 100 yards in penalties. You have problems. So Oklahoma, again, having problems controlling the penalties. They need to get that short up because Texas is just a few days away. And then number 4, run, baby, run. I go thumbs off. On one hand, Oklahoma just barely averaged over 4 yards per carry, which is barely better than what they did against Miami. But the Sooners did end up with over 200 yards rushing, which stat-wise I can't give a thumbs down to. But remember, Oklahoma had difficulty scoring touchdowns in the red zone, and that was really shown in the game against Baylor, so they have to improve on that. So I go thumbs off. Talking about this game, again, Oklahoma, they had to pull away to win. And I'm not saying you shouldn't be happy that Oklahoma won, because you should always be happy with a win, because winning beats losing any day of the week. But you realize that if you don't get better, then Texas is going to exploit your weaknesses. They're just right now more talented and a little bit better than Oklahoma. Doesn't mean Oklahoma can't pull off the upset, but it does mean they have to control the penalties and also control the ball as far as trying to catch it. Please catch it. It will help you. Final score again, 33-7, Oklahoma with the win. And we will have the weekly matchup show coming up in a few days. OU and Texas, it's getting closer. Goodbye for now.